right now. We're just going to wait while the sergeants go ahead and call the members. Thank you.
Then Mr. Price just called.
Yeah, Debbie told me that on the walk down.
So we're down to 4.
4,
Yep.
okay, I just want to make sure.
And Mr. Cortani just signed in, so we'll be first. He's not, he told his request. Okay. Oh, thank you, she did it for you. Someone did it for you.
Good morning. I just wanted to check to see what the sign number is.
Mr. Cortani.
Okay, that's it. That's easy. Okay, thank you.
I hear there's an initiative being circulated that since the auditor's office is present so much, there's going to be federal health care.
I thought you were going to say constitutional. No, thank you.
Don't give any ideas.
Your bill's quick.
We have several weekends.
Okay. I want want to thank the members who have already made it here. We don't have enough for a quorum, but we can start as a subcommittee. But before we start, I have two announcements to make. The first one is that Speaker Bass has appointed Assemblymember Chesbrough to replace Assemblywoman Evans, who's unable to make it. So just for today's hearing, we will have Assemblymember Chesbrough. And the second one is that item 2009121 by Senator Price regarding the Central Basin Municipal Water District has been pulled by the author from today's agenda. So if you are here on that request, we won't be hearing it. We now have 4 audit requests to consider, and the authors will be given 3 minutes to present, followed by the state auditor, and representatives from the affected agencies will be given 2 minutes. Public comment will also be limited. The first 2 persons will be given a minute each to speak, and everyone else can state their names and their positions on the audit. But thank you in advance for your cooperation. We're going to try to get this hearing done as quickly as possible. But we'll move on to regular business for now, and we welcome our esteemed state auditor, Ms. Elaine Howell. Ms. Howell will provide the committee with information on the Bureau of State Audit's status report and the work in progress. Welcome, Ms. Howell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. For the record, Elaine Howell, California State Auditor. As far as the status report, we currently have 14 audits in progress. 6 of those audits are statutory audits. The single audit that we've talked about at a few hearings and that you've heard about, looking at federal programs and the way that California implements those particular programs. Many of those programs will be receiving Recovery Act money, so we have embarked on that project. In addition, we've started the financial audit for the state of California, where we go in and we look at internal controls and accounting practices by the various departments and issue an opinion on the statements the controller puts out. We also have a couple of statutory audits. One is a recurring audit that we conduct of campus crime. It's essentially an audit of the Clery Act, where we're required by law to look at least 6 institutions, either at the community college level or higher ed, CSU, UC, and even private institutions as far as their complying with the Clery Act. So that's the campus crime reporting audit we have on there. And then we have a couple of projects, one related to bonds. We were in some bond language to audit housing bonds. We had looked at housing bonds a couple of years ago, and we felt that it was time to get back in and look at how well HCD is administering those bond programs. And then we have an ongoing presence in Fiscal as far as monitoring the activities of the steering committee and periodically reporting to the legislature. And as we have on our work in progress, we intend to present a report to the legislature, an update in January of next year. We have 8 discretionary audits, or audits that were approved by the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, underway. That's all of the audits that the committee has approved except for the high-speed rail audit that was approved by the committee. And the reason we haven't started that audit is because the committee directed us to delay commencing that audit until the High-Speed Rail Authority had the ability to apply for awards under the Recovery Act. So we have delayed that. We intend to start that audit in September. So taking that all into consideration, it's my understanding there are 4 audits under consideration for the committee today. Our resources indicate that we would be able to start all 4 audits. We would not be able to start any of them until later this year, more towards the fall, around November. And that's because we'll be completing about 4 or 5 audits over the next couple of months. You'll see we have a couple that are going out in September and 2 or 3 that are going out in October. So as those staff free up, we would be able to assign them to any audits that are approved today. And then again, in January, we will have resources available to commence an additional 4 audits. It's my understanding the committee wants to reconvene as early as possible in the next legislative year. So I wanted to give the committee that information as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having, we need one more senator and then we'll have a quorum. So if anybody is watching now, if they could come down, that would be great. But we'll now hear our new request, and we do take them in sign-in order. So the first one to sign in is Assemblymember Furutani on 2009114, DGS procurement practices. Mr. Furutani?
Good morning. I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, distinguished members of the committee. We respectfully request the Joint Legislative Audit Committee to authorize and direct the state auditor to audit the procurement practices of the California Department of General Services. We are specifically interested in the department's use of the strategic sourcing contracts and the impact these practices have on small and disabled veteran business enterprises. Concerns have been brought to me because of meetings we've been having in the district and elsewhere to look at the issue of California small business and disabled veteran businesses, that strategic source contracting has had negative impacts on small and disabled veteran businesses from participating in state contracts. Small and disabled veteran businesses are critical and crucial to California's economy. As we've been talking about in general terms for months and months, the issue of economic stimulus, you couldn't find a more important and better way to stimulate the economy than by promoting small business. A June 2009 study commissioned by the Procurement Division of GGS demonstrates that small and disabled veteran businesses enterprises produce significant economic benefits to the state of California and do not add additional costs to the state for forwarding these small and disabled veteran businesses state contracts. Contracting with small and veteran businesses generate new jobs with additional business and income taxes being paid. It is vital that small disabled veteran businesses have the same opportunities that larger enterprises have in securing state contracts. DGS procurement practices should ensure that small and veteran businesses have the opportunity to participate in state contracts and that California is getting the best value for its dollar on goods and services. The audit will help DGS identify holes in their procurement practices and allow DGS to be more efficient while ensuring contract compliance. I would like to yield my time also to Assemblymember Ruskin, who has been at the forefront of this issue, and I appreciate his leadership in work in this regard.
Thank you. As I notice that we now have a quorum, if I could just pause you for a minute as we take roll. Secretary, please take the roll.
Huber.
Here.
Huber here. Chesbro. Chesbro here. Kodo. DeVore. DeVore here. Garrick. Garrick here. Hagman. Hagman here. Monning. Monning here. Ashburn. Ashburn present. Cogdill. Cogdill here. Ducheney. Ducheney here. Dutton. Dutton here. Padilla. Wiggins. Wiggins here. Wolk. Wolk here.
We have a quorum. Thank you so much for allowing me to pause in your presentation. I know that you do have another Assembly member here to present, but before we do that, I'm going to take the testimony of the state auditor on the audit request. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. The objectives that Mr. Furutani and others have asked us to accomplish in looking at strategic sourcing is to start out, first of all, in looking at the policies and procedures that were established. As you may be aware, strategic sourcing was first implemented in 2004. So one of the questions that the members have for us is to determine what procedures they've set in place and if there have been any modifications to those procedures in the last 4 or 5 years. So to take a look at those. Also, looking at those procedures to see if there are policies in there that would encourage or give small and disabled veteran businesses equal opportunity to be chosen as a strategic sourcing contractor. In addition to that, if DGS tracks the information, the members have asked us to look at the number of strategically sourced contracts and identifying a ratio of those that include small businesses or include disabled veteran businesses or those that are specifically with those types of businesses and compare that to the total number of strategic source contracts to try and identify a ratio. In addition to that, determine the number of, in the last 2 years, prior to implementation of strategic sourcing, so prior to 2004, the number of disabled veteran business contracts and small business contracts, and compare that to subsequent years of implementing strategic sourcing initiatives. Also, to the extent we can, to identify not only the number of strategically sourced contracts, but the dollar value of those particular contracts. And then to take a sample of contracts, both small, medium, and large, and look at the justification for that specific contract. Did it comply with the intent of strategic sourcing initiative, the legal criteria, et cetera. And then how does DGS evaluate for what's called commercially useful function? And this is an important element where there are specific requirements under a bill that was enacted a few years ago that tries to preclude the use of a small business or a disabled veteran business as a pass-through entity. Essentially, what commercially useful function expects is that small business or disabled veteran business actually does some substantive work, really has a role in that particular contract, much beyond sitting or serving as a pass-through entity. And then the last couple of objectives are to look at DGS's process for evaluating the effectiveness of the strategic sourcing initiative, looking at how they've estimated the benefits and have they gone back and assessed whether or not the state has achieved those benefits that were intended by that initiative. And then the last objective is looking at staffing within the procurement division since the inception of strategic sourcing and determine if there have been any increases or any changes in the staffing and look for reasons or identify reasons for those changes. So in a nutshell, those are the objectives that we've been asked to accomplish in the audit. We've budgeted this at about 1,850 hours. We'll be primarily working at the Department of General Services. If we need to go out to state agencies, we will, but we're assuming at this point that all of our work would be focused at DGS. So an audit of that size would take us about 5 months to complete. With that, I can answer any questions members may have.
Thank you. I'm going to hold questions right now and ask Mr. Ruskin to come up and the affected agencies.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Alas, this is an awkward position. I'm not used to this. Please excuse my back. Thank you, Mr. Foratani, for the introduction. In late 2007, a constituent met with me to discuss specifically one strategic source contract, namely the Office Depot contract. That contract gave almost exclusive rights to Office Depot and 9 small businesses and disabled veterans businesses to supply state agencies with office products. What stood out for me immediately upon initial investigation of the contract was the fact that all independent small businesses and disabled veterans businesses in the contract all listed the same physical address. Having seen that, and we actually went out there. We went out there. Staff went out to assure me that that was the case. Having seen that, I felt that it needed a very close look. I immediately requested by letter all the documentation on the Office Depot contract, as well as 2 other strategic source contracts. I received a letter from DGS. In that letter, included in that letter, among many things, was their statement that they were going to do their own audit. So I felt that I was reaping benefits immediately. There were 2 issues at stake in my investigation of the Office Depot contract. The first issue was the contract being implemented properly to produce savings for the state? Were we really getting the best price we were supposed to get? The second issue is, were the roles assigned to small businesses and disabled veterans businesses giving real opportunities to small business? Looking briefly at the first issue, the best price. With the office supply contract, the state was to receive a discounted price for items that were ordered often. Office supplies such as paper clips and yellow highlighters, everything you might imagine. Such products were marked down below retail prices in the catalog and online and were supposed to secure for the state a substantial discount in return for the volume. My staff pored through boxes of documents. We received over 25 boxes of documents from DGS, as well as reviewed the web-based portal used by the state agencies to order office supplies to check the ease in which a state agency could find and therefore order the special priced items. There were two ways you could order. First online, and then the catalog, looking at the online issue. In several instances, the first product listed on the website was not the preferred price, but another more expensive item. In some cases, it took reviewing several pages on the website before you could even find the preferred price. I can testify to this personally. I did this personally myself to experiment with the ease in which one would order. It was counterintuitive, to say the least. It was a matter of luck if you were able to order the discounted price. Then I looked at the catalog. There was a beginning section which, if you knew about the section of the catalog, you would know that's where you were supposed to look to get the discounted prices. But there was nothing at the beginning of the catalog that instructed you to go there. And so the chances of your ordering the discounted item, should you wish to order it, I believe were almost nil. In the index, in addition, there were countless examples of where the number that was given a product, should you order that number, you still did not get the discounted price. You order using that number. At this point, I joined the Assembly Select Committee on Procurement with Chairman Price, and we held a hearing on May 15th in which we brought to light all that I've just described briefly for you and more. The CEO of Office Depot made a response statement in which he said that essentially, somehow, they would know what people meant to order, and it would all be rectified by the invoice process. I, of course, was incredulous.
Yeah. Assemblymember Ruskin, I appreciate the story with us.
I'd like to second the bill.
Should I be
Thank
brief
you.
and go to the conclusion? All right.
We're a little over time now on your presentation, but
In the end, Office Depot voluntarily refunded $2 million to the state, but I don't think the $2 million told us the full story. And then finally, in respect to your agenda, let me say that there were several observations we made in regard to whether small businesses and disabled veterans businesses were actually given the right opportunity. Those observations were that before being selected for the contract, some of the businesses had only marginal connections to office supplies, some apparently none at all. And that while it appeared that some of the consortium members were in fact providing a service to the state, there were others that could only be described as pass-throughs. There was no certainty in many cases they were providing a commercially useful function. The contracts did not need to verify that once the contracts were signed. Small businesses were supposed to be providing training. The overcharges raised the question of whether they were. And all orders placed through the small businesses went through the Epilon portal directly to the Office Depot website. Epilon was a small business, but it kind of controlled all the traffic that went to make orders. I would just say in conclusion, I believe we need more investigation of the type that the state auditor can provide to understand whether strategic source contracts are working, both to provide savings for the state and to provide real opportunities for small business and disabled veterans businesses.
thank you, Assemblymember Ruskin. I know we have quite a few people who are here from DGS. Do we have Jim Butler also? If we can get everybody else who represents the affected agencies to come up. Thank you.
Morning.
Thank you. My name is Jim Butler. I'm the Deputy Director of Procurement for DGS and Chief Procurement Officer for the state. And simply want to say that DGS fully supports the audit. We'll give all cooperation necessary. DGS is a tremendous supporter of small businesses and disabled veteran businesses in the state. We conduct well over 100 outreach events every year to really drive and build our small business and DVB base, and have committed a tremendous amount of resources to this constituency and believe that it is truly important to the state.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And hi, I'm Robert Ulrey, Legislative Representative for Department of General Services.
Thank you. At this time, we'll take any public comment on the audit request. Anyone in support of the audit? And you can line up at the mic right here for Assemblymember Hagman, too.
Good morning, Chairman Hoover and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the California Small Business Association, and I'm also testifying on behalf of the California Black Chamber of Commerce, my friend Aubrey Stone. They have their conference in San Jose this week, and so this is our joint testimony. A major area of concern to the small business community has been and continues to be the issue of job creation. And I would hope that one of the things in this audit would determine how many jobs were made available when small business had the bids and had the contracts versus how many jobs were created when there was only 9 and some of them only had 1 or 2 employees. As the coordinator for the Small Business Advocacy Program, I've had small businesses for several years now throughout the state contacting me regarding their lack of opportunity for state contracts. First, it was the IT small businesses, then was janitorial services, then office suppliers, then paper suppliers, then food distributors, and the list goes on. Many of these small businesses are no longer in business or have moved out of state. I have personally participated in campaigns to get small business owners certified, only to learn that we couldn't verify how many, if any, received contracts. I will continue to work on this and work diligently with the Department of General Services to make a positive outcome.
Thank you. We got other testimony to squeeze in here.
3 areas I want you to consider: the CUF law, the loss leader law, the prompt payment law, and I want you to consider it an investment. The cost is minimal to the return in savings and future costs to the state of California.
Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I am Bob Moorhead. My company is RAM Enterprises. We are a certified small business and disabled veteran business in the state of California. Over the years, we've observed that oversight and compliance and strategic source and other contracts is not effectively managed. I want to give you one example. On March 24, 2008, a $20 million 2-year contract for paper was awarded to a small business who submitted the lowest cost and received a DVB incentive. 2 months after the award of the contract, 1/4 of the contract was canceled without penalty as the vendor would not honor the low prices he committed to. The state had to go into the open market on an emergency procurement for a critical product required for the 2008 election and paid $700,000 more than it had contracted for just 2 months earlier. Because the contractor was not accountable for the price he committed to, California paid a much higher price. 7 months later, the vendor was unable to show that the intended DVB participation of $52,000 per month, for which he received a 5% incentive at award, was not and would not be paid, and the remainder of the contract was canceled without penalty. Due to decisions made by DGS to not hold the contractor accountable for contracted pricing and terms on this and many other contracts, the state pays higher prices and timely requirements for critical products can be seriously impacted. In a meeting with business representatives on 6 May of this year, a deputy director stated that if companies were held accountable for prices and terms and contracts, they most likely would fail, and it is not the policy of DGS to put companies out of business. This sends a message to the business community that there are no consequences for making deceptive claims to win an award. If discovered, a company faces no consequences and continues to bid on state business without penalty. Companies who competitively bid for state business in good faith are at a disadvantage when competing with companies that deceptively submit prices and terms, are awarded contracts, and not held accountable for performing under the contract.
Thank you, Mr. Moorhead. Thank you. We've exceeded our time. Is there any other public comment opposed to the audit request? We have already had a motion and a second. Are there any questions from the members? Then, Secretary, please call the roll.
Huber?
Aye.
Huber, aye. Chesbro? Chesbro, aye. Kodo? Kodo, aye. DeVore?
Aye.
DeVore, aye. Garrick? Garrick, aye. Hagman? Hagman, aye. Monning? Monning, aye. Ashburn? Ashburn, aye. Cogdill? Cogdill, aye. Ducheney? Ducheney, aye. Dutton? Dutton, aye. Padilla? Wiggins? Wiggins, aye. Wolk? Wolk, aye.
The audit is approved. It passes. I'll leave the roll open so Senator Padilla can cast a vote on the audit, but thank you.
We're used to that.
Mr. De La Torre is signed in next, but I don't see him here. And if he doesn't get here in the next couple seconds, then we will take one of our committee members' audit requests. Mr. Garrick would be next in line.
Morning, how are you?
Good.
Thank you for quickly getting to the chair.
Good morning,
Mr. Garrick.
and thank you, Madam, for taking me at this early morning hour. Thank you for the opportunity to present this audit request regarding the community facility districts. As your background and analysis will show, I have worked for over a year with a group of homeowners in my district who have become concerned about how their CFD assessments are being spent by the school district in which they reside. These homeowners have spent many years and thousands of their own dollars researching the finances of the district in hopes of finding where the money has been spent. Unfortunately, they have not received sufficient answers from the school district. I addressed their concerns, and I held several meetings with the school district, submitted a letter to the school officials outlining the information that we were all seeking. The request for information from the district has been met with opposition, and I was informed that they would not comply with even some of my simplest requests. That is why I'm here today. These concerned homeowners have presented me with volumes of documents that appear to show money has been unfortunately mismanaged. To be clear, I'm not alleging willful misconduct or a series of premeditated accounting errors. However, with the proliferation of these type of financing districts throughout the state, I can understand how many types of errors could occur. To that end, I believe this audit will help our constituents and your constituents across the state better understand where their tax dollars are being spent, and more importantly, spent in accordance with the purpose of those original CFDs or Melrose districts that we all have in our districts. I have with me today to address to answer any of your questions and to express their concerns, Mr. Leonard Steinberg, who will provide a quick overview, and he has even a few handouts if you'd like to review them.
Before we take Mr. Steinberg, is that correct? Let's take the state auditor's testimony on this audit request.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quickly, the objectives. First of all, the first thing we need to do is for this specific district, it's my understanding, Assemblymember Garrick wants us to look at, and I hope I pronounce it right, San Dieguito Community Facility Services District. So the first thing we're going to need to do is to look at those documents and resolutions that support the creation of the district, and then determine what purposes are included in those particular formation documents, whether or not they adequately describe the appropriate uses of the funds that will be collected under this particular district. The next objective is actually to select a sample of projects that have been funded with the fees that have been collected by the service district, and tie that back to those formation documents to make sure that the projects that are being funded are appropriate and for the appropriate purposes. In addition to that, Assemblymember Garrick has asked us to look at a 5-year window in identifying total revenues that have been collected through the assessed fees and also some bond proceeds, and then categorize those or identify those by major expenditure category and determine how these funds have been spent. In addition to that, asking us to look at controls, which is a typical request when we're looking at collection of fees and expenditures, looking to make sure that they have proper controls to assure that these expenditures are for the appropriate purposes. Then actually sample some expenditures. So if you have controls in place, as I've discussed with the committee in the past and other audits, you establish the controls and then you have to test those controls. So we would actually sample some expenditures to make sure that those controls are actually functioning properly. The last objective that Mr. Garrick has asked us to look at is responsiveness to Public Records Act requests. First of all, determine what criteria that the service district is subject to as far as Public Records Act requests, and assess their cooperativeness or their responsiveness to those requests. The budget is it's a relatively small audit. It's about 1,230 hours, again, because we will be focusing on that one specific district. And so an audit about that size is about 3 or 4 months, a relatively small audit.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Steinberg.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for hearing this matter. Perhaps I can just, I'll make this very brief. If I can just spend a minute or so telling you about who I am and who we are. 1 minute? That's all I get? Okay. Well, okay. Then let me jump in. I'm a local native California living in San Diego, big supporter of public schools, volunteer a tremendous amount of time at the schools, at the various schools in our district. I am involved in an organization called Friends of North County. We are a nonprofit group. There are approximately 2,450 households that are involved with this particular CFD or Mello-Roos. Each year, these 2,450 households pay approximately $1.8 million directly into the school district. It's a total of 35 years with a cumulative total of approximately $63 million that will be paid to this particular school district. We are here today because in 1998, the school district sold bonds and they pledged approximately $18 million to be used for a particular facility. For approximately 6 years, the district marketed that they would be using those funds specifically for that facility. And after 6 years, we began asking questions about that $18 million. We eventually learned that the school district no longer has the $18 million that they had pledged. When we tried to understand exactly where the money was and how much they have raised, you have an exhibit there in front of you that demonstrates that we were given one document from them, if I could just see this, in April of 2008, that they said that they had raised $26 million from the Mello-Roos. Approximately 2 months later, in July of 2008, they said it was almost $33 million, and then 2 months later they came back and said it was approximately $28 million. There's a swing there of $6 or $7 million. The district keeps giving us different answers. We don't know where the money went. We don't know how to find the money. We have another exhibit here, which you're welcome to, from one of their own auditors' report of a general fund, not this bond, where they didn't even comply with GAAP procedures and they didn't have correct internal procedures. So
Thank you, sir. We actually have people from the district who are here to testify, so why don't we bring them up now? And want to hear from the affected agencies, which in this case would be the Community Facilities District. I think I have Eric Dill and Stephen Ma.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Good morning,
Good morning.
Chair, committee members. My name is Steve Ma. I'm the Associate Superintendent for Business for the San Diego Union High School District. To my left is Eric Dill, who is our Executive Director of Business Services. I will take 2 minutes to briefly, put a little history around our Mello-Roos district and hopefully put the request in context.
Briefly.
CFD 94-2 was formed 15 years ago to provide financing for new and existing school facilities. The formation of the CFD was a product of a mitigation agreement between the developer and the school district. The mitigation agreement clearly defines how the special taxes can be used, and more specifically identifies the school facilities that the monies could be used on. There are 6 existing schools facilities which the monies can be used for, and there was 1 proposed middle school. All these schools directly benefit the Mello-Roos District CFD 94-2. Funds from CFD 94-2 have only been spent on the projects permitted under the mitigation agreement. Prior audits, as well as certification by our board, clearly states that. Over the last 15 years, the district has experienced some change in demographics, and as a result, our initial push to accommodate new kids actually was moderated because of the economy and demographic changes. We then shifted our focus to improving existing school facilities as opposed to building new school facilities. The district's had numerous questions of public records requests on the use of these special taxes over the 4 years. We have provided all the information that has been requested. Staff has spent hundreds of hours compiling this information. We continue to work with homeowners to explain specifically how the funds were used. The district's outside auditor annually reviews all 9 CFDs. They review revenues, expenditures, debt service schedules, internal controls to ensure they are in compliance with GAAP. The auditors have never found any exceptions in our CFDs.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mon.
Question, Madam Chair.
It'll be in just 1 minute because I think we're going to have a couple of questions on this one. Did you have one last thing you wanted to say?
Just actually a couple of things, and this will be quick.
That's over 2 minutes already.
We have had extensive agencies ask us for information, including the Office of Public School Construction, the county office, as well as the San Diego County District Attorney. We have provided documents, all documents that they have requested. They have chosen not to pursue any additional investigation based on the information we had sent them. So this is just another request in a long line of requests of providing information.
Okay, before I go to committee member questions, were there any public comments for or against this audit? No. I had some questions because one of my concerns, and this is not usually what the committee would do, take one facility district and do an audit, but there are some concerns here about bond oversight, and I think that that's a larger issue that we are working on in the state legislature now, is how do we effectively make sure that we are having transparency in these bonds and that people aren't repurposing the funds that are collected through specific use bonds. And this example came up, so I think if you could just address that issue for me on whether or not the initial bond really foresaw you repurposing any of the revenue that would be collected under that bond.
Again, I would need to go back to the original mitigation agreement that identified 7 school facilities in which the specific 94-2 funds could be spent. The Board of Trustees annually certifies that those funds are actually spent in compliance with that mitigation agreement. And we believe that in our public workshops, facility workshops, our authority workshops, we have clearly explained to the public how the monies were spent with respect to 94-2.
Okay,
does that answer your question?
Yes, Senator Ashburn.
Well, I heard a lot of words. I'm just wondering how much money was taken in and how much money was spent, and why can't you document it?
We have documented it very often for the public. We have taken in, we have actually spent, there's a difference between what has been spent and what is encumbered. There is one project left, and that is the difference, I believe, that Mr. Steinberg is talking about between the monies that were spent, approximately $28 million to date, and the monies encumbered for a future project that we are waiting for additional release of state funds so we could complete the project.
I mean, how long has this been going on, the questioning of the receipt of the funds and the expenditure of the funds?
4 years.
And 4 years, and you've not been able to at least reach an agreement that this is the factual information, even if people might question, how it's being used, if it meets the mitigation requirements under the original agreement. I mean, is this not troubling to you that your constituency is still questioning?
I believe that the school district has really gone overboard in terms of providing all documentation, all records with respect to how the money has been spent. I'm quite frustrated in terms of what else I could do in terms of explaining, providing specifics, providing documents as to how the district has spent the money on facilities.
I mean, to me, this could be put on a single piece of paper if we're talking about 7 facilities and one prospective project. I mean, how difficult is that to document the revenues received and the application of those revenues?
We have provided specific information in public forums with respect to how many dollars has been spent by project to the penny.
Just for the record, the committee members didn't receive any of that, so we don't have that information. And I know Senator Cheney also has a question.
Well, I guess my question is more to Mr. Garrick and the others. I mean, I assume if the auditor did do this audit, she would generally, what we do is go back and look at all the previous audits. And what's a little frustrating to me about the flip side of this is the request is that there appears to have been several audits that are public documents, and I don't kind of get what in those audits has not, because it feels to me like it should be a local audit and a county office audit or something. I'm a little frustrated with using the state auditor for these kind of local district issues. And so my initial reaction before I even heard some of the school district stuff was, why aren't we doing a local audit? And then I heard they did do local audits. They do annual audits. And I'm sort of not clear why that audit isn't satisfy what folks want to know.
Senator, may I have Mr. Steinberg address it, who has been following this and has a history of those audits and what they did address in those audits and what they didn't?
Senator, thank you for the question. We have asked on multiple occasions for copies of audits of this particular CFD. We have asked them verbally, we have asked them in writing, and we finally sought them under the Public Records Act. This is what we were given, and you're welcome to have it. It is a 11 by 14 sheet of paper. There were 2 of them with handwritten notes. This is the actual paper. That's the actual font.
I mean, I've seen those school district audits.
Right. We've never.
Do you not attend the school board meetings where they adopt them and certify them, or what?
We have attended. We've had hundreds of people attending school board meetings, and we are told that the item will not be discussed when we get up at the podium to ask questions about the audits. They have never provided us with an audit. When we've asked deeper questions about the numbers that we have, the difference between the 26 and the 33 million, the district came out with an agreement where they demanded that we stop inspecting their records.
Well, it's obviously costing the school district a lot of money, which is another concern in this fiscal environment. Sure. The auditor's suggesting it'll cost her 100 whatever thousand. Sure. The school district would spend at least a comparable amount of money, and probably more than the state auditor, in complying with the state auditor's audit request. And so that's money that's not going to pay teachers when school districts aren't getting any money anyway. Well, San Diego, you're borderline basic aid anyway. So, but
and we have documents, Senator, that show
basic aid still or not? Yeah.
We have documents, Senator, that show that we believe the district has spent the money from, as you use the term, from this CFD into other places where they were not allowed to, several $1 million. And we have those documents
here. But to do what? To educate your kids? To pay teachers? What?
To build schools that are 26 miles away that were not in the original bond agreement that limited those 7 facilities that Mr. Ma referenced.
Oh, I see.
They're 26 miles away, correct. But the bond was written specifically with specific limitations on how it could be spent.
Sure. The Mello-Roos is limited to the area of the Mello-Roos.
Not to the district. Right. Most Mello-Rooses are limited to the district, you're correct. This one is limited to only 7 facilities.
Right.
They spent, we believe, millions of dollars outside of those 7 facilities. And we believe that's why the $18 million doesn't exist. If you were to ask Mr. Ma if they still had the money to build the school that they had proposed, he has told us several times they do not. It's gone.
I'd like to move the audit request.
Is there a second? There's a second. Any other questions from the committee members? Secretary, please call the roll.
Huber.
Aye.
Huber, aye. Chesbro. Chesbro, aye. Kodo. Kodo, aye. DeVore.
Aye.
DeVore, aye. Garrick.
Aye.
Garrick, aye. Hagman. Hagman, aye. Monning. Monning, aye. Ashburn. Ashburn, aye. Cogdill. Cogdill, aye. Ducheney. Dutton. Dutton, aye. Padilla. Padilla, aye. Wiggins. Wolk. Wolk, aye. That's it.
Your audit has been approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I see Assemblymember De La Torre is here now, so if we can have him up on 2009118, Regional Centers. Thank you.
Good morning. How are you? Good.
Welcome, Mr. De La Torre.
Thank you very much. To some of you, this one will be a little familiar. The request that we have for an audit of regional centers that provide services to developmentally disabled folks was generated by a bipartisan unanimous approval of the 18-member Committee on Accountability on June 10th. This was a hearing that we had to discuss allegations of preferential treatment of vendors, refusals to provide operational information, and acts of retaliation at regional centers in the state of California. The regional center system is a network of 21 private, not-for-profit organizations that purchase services for the people with developmental disabilities. The system is critical in helping consumers live active, independent lives in their communities. That's not what we're questioning here. However, the system was designed decades ago to serve 20,000 consumers. Today, it receives approximately $4 billion to serve 240,000 customers. Clearly, the model that was created under the Lanterman Act has evolved significantly, and I think we haven't kept up with the times. There are oversight requirements in the Lanterman Act with respect to health and safety and consumer access to services, but it is silent about operational transparency and accountability. Despite being not-for-profit, regional centers make decisions about how to spend $4 billion in state money every year, and that requires us to ensure that that money is spent properly. Another quasi-public example is that regional center employees are CalPERS members. We have some school district employees that aren't CalPERS members or CalSTRS members, and here we have regional centers that are nonprofits that have their employees in the CalPERS system. They have no whistleblower protections. Again, they're nonprofits, quasi-public, but there's no whistleblower protections that you would have working for the state government.
Federal whistleblowers are in effect, though, because most of their money's federal.
Some, but they don't have the full whistleblower protections of the state law. So this fear of retaliation is a barrier to oversight and accountability. Requests for basic operational information from providers, consumers, even area boards have been denied. 10 days after our hearing on this issue, while implementing cuts in services, the Central Valley, this is just an example, I'm not pointing them out, the Central Valley Regional Center issued $500,000 in staff bonuses to 350 administrative staff. Again, this isn't for the services that were being provided. This was just for their staffing. We need to look at this clearly. It's a lot of money that goes through this. We're not trying, again, to focus on, we're not trying to minimize the services that are being provided. We are trying to focus on that state dollar as it makes its way through the system. So specifically, we're asking that the audit examine regional centers with respect to their internal controls, conflict of interest and lack of transparency in awarding of contracts, public access to information regarding the operations of regional centers and their expenditures of public funds, and the audit should explore allegations of retaliation against service providers who question regional center decisions or make reports pertaining to these issues. And I'll close with this. We had one witness come and testify, even though there were several that had been in communication with us. We got one letter anonymously submitted. We knew who they were, but they didn't want to be out there because of fear of retaliation. And then there was another one who signed the letter but didn't want to come up. We're not talking about national security here. We're talking about folks with developmental disabilities that need services, and we're supposed to be providing for those services. And somehow it's just not working. So I ask for your support of this request for an audit.
Thank you. And the State Auditor?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. The request by Mr. Delatorre and the Accountability Committee has several different objectives. The first is to look at the Department of Developmental Services and what role or responsibilities they may have in oversight of regional centers. We think this is going to be a relatively small piece of the audit. The majority of the work that we will be doing will be out at a sample of regional centers. The other objectives specific to those individual regional centers that we visit include looking at expenditures. As Assemblymember Delatorre indicated, the request asks us to look at a 2-year window, the last 2 fiscal years. We'll use the most recent fiscal years. The information's available. Hopefully that's 07, 08, and 08-09. And then at each of those regional centers, look at the expenditures to make sure that they were for allowable activities under the statute, under the Lanterman Act, and whether or not those expenditures were reasonable. Again, looking at internal controls, et cetera. At each of the regional centers, in addition to looking at expenditures, the committee and Mr. Delatorre have asked us to look at service provider contracts and look at the contracting practices that the regional centers are using to determine who they are using as vendors to provide services to the consumers. Specifically looking at their contracting practices and determining whether or not they do include an assessment of past performance of a particular vendor. Do they consider that when they determine whether or not they're going to contract with that particular vendor again? In addition, looking to see if they have practices to address any conflict of interest issues that may exist when they're determining who to contract with as far as these service providers. In addition, we have an objective to select a sample of both current and past service providers and survey them, specifically asking about filing complaints if they have perceived retaliation, if they've experienced retaliation. So that would be, it's something we've done in other audits, so we would select a sample of both current providers and past providers and ask them to respond to that survey, and then we would aggregate that information and report it in that form. And then the final objective is specific, again, Public Records Act requests and the regional centers, what procedures they have in place to comply with PRA, and looking at a 2-year window and assessing their responsiveness to any requests for public records that the regional centers have received. The budget's relatively, well, I wouldn't say high, but it's one of the higher audits on the agenda today. The reason for that is because we have to go to multiple locations. Again, as I indicated in my earlier comments, we don't see spending a lot of time at DDS. We'll need to spend some time there, but the majority of the audit work will be done out in the field, probably at a sample of 5 or 6 regional centers. So the budget is a little over 2,300 hours. An audit of that size would take us about 6 or 7 months to complete.
Thank you. Do we have anyone? Let me just see if we have anybody from the affected agencies. Is there anyone from DDS or the regional centers here?
Good morning. Mark Hutchinson. I'm the Chief Deputy Director for the Department of Developmental Services, and certainly we will cooperate with any audit of the regional centers. We are a little bit concerned about the timing. The regional center system is involved currently in implementing 25 budget reductions to save $334 million, and it's a great deal of time and energy on their part to implement those reductions, but certainly will be cooperative if the audit's approved.
Thank you. Are there any public comment in support or opposition to the audit? No, then Assemblymember Cotto first, then Senator Cheney.
Madam Chair.
I'll move the audit.
Okay, Senator DeCheney.
I guess I mean, I got a note today, and I know, and I don't know how to think about this, and I don't know how you're going to pick which ones or how it works. I mean, the concern I got from a local regional center was the cost of complying, and that there are already, where's the DDS? There are DDS audits done every year. There are, but I can see the value, and I guess the frustration with regional centers is the inconsistency has always been a problem. One regional center does it really well, and one regional center doesn't. So I don't know how you pick which ones to look at and to think about. I mean, I'll just rate. I mean, there were some concerns that they raised in terms of, you know, how they have their own relationships and those kinds of things with who they do. And I don't know how you think about where the problems are. I mean, and how much it's sort of like the school district problem. How many resources are we taking away from the folks who we're trying to help by having them spend time doing this, or how much do we think that's going to cost the centers to do? And I do appreciate, I mean, I know some of the centers that are problematic, and some of them are in your neighborhood, so I get it. But I don't know how to think about that. How would you pick the 5 or 6? Just kind of based on complaints or not complaints, or
it would be based on a variety of information. Certainly, we would talk to the department to see if they
see
had
the previous audits,
any particular previous audits, and then we would want to make sure that we, what we typically do when we're asked to look at regional locations is try to get Northern California, Southern California, urban, rural. Look at the size of the regional centers, the number of consumers they're providing services to. So we try to get a good mix.
Because you're not going to do all 21.
Factors. Yeah, there's 21, so that's why I was indicating we're intending to visit probably 5 or 6 at the most.
But you could review the audits, like the department's audits for all of them, because they do those annually, and there are federal rules and federal audits that they all have to comply with.
Right, and that's standard practice. Anytime we conduct an audit, the first thing we
could do the 21 that way.
If something's been already has been done that we can build upon, so that we're not duplicating effort. So we certainly would do that, and I think that would be some of the work that would be done at headquarters, at the department itself, to learn some knowledge from them.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question related to Senator Cheney's comment or questions? Allegations or history of complaints or anything would not play a role in terms of trying to determine which centers would be selected?
I think that would be something we would need to consider. We would talk to the department about any concerns they had, and looking at the audits, if there were issues raised in previous audits regarding certain regional centers, then those certainly would be ones that would be considered, yes.
Thank you. I know there was some public comment that I didn't see earlier, so we can take some public comment. No problem.
Thank you for your time. My name is Boyd Bradshaw. I'm the president of Res Coalition, which is a business league for residential service providers. We have members from the Mexican border to the Sacramento area. And as a result, we do deal with over 16 different regional centers. And while we're not here today to go ahead and try and take down the regional center system, because we actually support it and are very much involved in that process, we do have to recognize that with 21 individual regional centers, there's a major dichotomy between successful regional centers and regional centers with some significant weaknesses. It's our belief that within this audit process, we'll be able to begin to identify some of the strengths within the better managed regional centers and implement those throughout the other parts of the system. We ourselves have asked for data from the regional centers, also from DDS, with regards to specific issues. And the regional centers have been very clear, and in the written testimony you'll have copies of letters from various regional centers stating that as private nonprofit entities, they believe they have no responsibility to provide us with any data or any information whatsoever with regards to any request that's made of them, and they've deferred us to DDS. DDS has deferred us back to the regional centers.
Thank you. Did you still have a question?
I have some additional comments, if I may. I'm going to do sort of one of those on the one hand and on the other hand. On the one hand, there are many, many reasons for the historic increases in costs that have been cited by Mr. De La Torre. And some of them are very valid and necessary and legitimate. Most of them, I would say, including the explosion of autism, including the greater level of and more successful level of diagnosis, and are doing a better job of actually trying to provide the services to allow disabled people to live in the community. So most of it's, I think, all very positive, and the regional centers and the contractors do the best job they can to advance that generally accepted societal goal we have in California of allowing disabled individuals to live in the most independent way possible. On the other hand, I can't think of another example in state government of expenditures of this size that are carried out by essentially non-public entities. I think it, in spite of that uniqueness, there should be no denying the need for accountability that we would expect of a state agency if they were carrying out these contracts or these programs. And so, and I note that we did not hear either individual regional centers or their associations stand up here and object to doing this. So I think it's important for us to provide the oversight for the sake of the people who are served, because we want to make sure that the very best services are provided in the most economical way possible. And under the budget circumstances we're in, as much money as we are spending, it's not enough. We got real problems with the services in the community that these folks need. And so I think we have an absolute responsibility to demand that these dollars are spent in the best possible way. So I'm very much for this.
Thank you, Senator Cheney.
Yeah, well, no, just for the record, because I didn't get the phone call till this morning. The San Diego Regional Center was objecting, and they said they hadn't heard about it until now, and they called us this morning. But that's the only one I've heard. And their concerns were the ones I stated. So I was trying to, part of it's just how much do we spend to do this and those kinds of issues.
My comments weren't meant as a counterpoint to you. My comments were not meant as a response to your comments.
No, I just wanted to just make that clear, just because we didn't have any official opposition and nobody was here, that I did get that phone call this morning. So just kind of for the record, but I'm with you, Senator Chesbrough. I mean, I just think they are so inconsistent that it's hard. And so if we can limit the cost and the time to the regional centers in the current circumstances, and given what DDS said, that they're in the midst of doing all these other cuts and stuff, makes it a little awkward, but it is something we need to get a handle on, and we haven't for a long time. So
I know as a member of the Accountability Committee, this did come up in the hearing, and it was the recommendation in the hearing that the audit be conducted. So most of the regional centers were on notice that there was an audit in the pipeline for quite some time. This was originally scheduled for our last JLAC hearing, and it was pulled given the context and the workload of that hearing to now, so people have had a fair amount of time and notice to deal with it. But I'll let you close, Mr. De La Torre.
Thank you. Just to be clear on the DDS audits that take place now, there's only two kinds of auditing that takes place. One is to verify financial statements, which is a very cursory analysis of how much money is coming in and going out. And then the other is that they can audit vendors. But the regional centers themselves do not get audited. And that's why this is so necessary. I urge your support.
We've had a motion and a second. Any other questions or comments? Then clerk, please call the roll, or Secretary Boyle.
Huber?
Aye.
Huber, aye. Chesbrough?
Aye.
Chesbrough, aye. Kodo? Kodo, aye. DeVore? Garrick?
Aye.
Garrick, aye. Hagman? Hagman, aye. Monning?
Aye.
Monning, aye. Ashburn?
No.
Ashburn, no. Cogdill? Ducheney? Ducheney, aye. Dutton? Dutton, aye. Padilla? Padilla, aye. Wiggins? No. Wiggins, no. Wolk? Wolk, aye. It's out.
Your audit is approved. Thank you, and I will leave the roll open for a couple minutes after the hearing for those members who aren't present to add on. We only have one request remaining. Senator Dutton. And this is item 2009-117 on the California Air Resources Board. Thank you, Senator Dutton.
Okay, Madam Chair and members, I'm requesting an audit of how the Air Resources Board tracks and allocates its cost to administer AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006. CARB borrowed $57 million from special funds over the past 2 years to implement AB 32, but it's not clear how the money has been spent. CARB has failed to release the information for $25 million of the $57 million they have received to date. The information that has been provided only serves to actually raise new questions, including whether CARB spent the funds on appropriate activities and whether CARB has the systems in place to establish the ongoing fee program that complies with AB 32. By failing to provide the information, CARB has delayed implementation of the fee, meaning that CARB cannot yet repay the $57 million owed to various special funds. And as a matter of fact, in this last budget that was passed, programs such as the local Conservation Corps program were cut because the special fund that program gets funded from didn't have enough revenue, and that's one of the funds that CARB actually owes the money to. These programs wouldn't have been cut if the fee had already been in place. It's important that the audit be done in the upcoming year, as CARB is in the process of finalizing the fee program. We all know what kind of challenges we have when we try to determine whether it be a fee or a tax. So it's important that this fee is established appropriately. Conducting the audit now will ensure that the fee is implemented appropriately from the start and will reduce problems in the future. So I would respectfully request an aye vote on this audit request.
Thank you. State Auditor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A few objectives Senator Dutton has asked us to look at. First of all, record-keeping methods that the board, the ARB, uses to track their costs, asking us to look at the two most recent fiscal years, and then determine how they allocate those costs among the various expenditure categories, and determine whether or not the methods they're using to track costs and those costs are in compliance with the actual legislation with AB 32. Looking at the ARB records, Senator Dutton has asked us to determine what activities these costs are supporting, and do they separate certain activities such as the activities to support the Climate Action Team, the Western Climate Initiative, et cetera. So really going in, looking at their record-keeping activities and how they categorize various costs. In addition to that, determine the total costs that ARB has identified that are necessary to implement AB 32, again looking at the two most recent fiscal years, 07-08 and 08-09, and how are they applying those costs to the various sectors. It's my understanding there are some sectors in the fee structure. I've briefly looked at some of the proposed regs, but we would be looking at ARB's practices to implement AB 32, how they're setting up the structure, how that aligns with their regulations or the proposed regulations for the fee structure. In addition to that, looking at projecting forward, reviewing and evaluating how they intend to keep their records for the current fiscal year, 9-10, and any future years where they will need to identify and allocate costs, again, among various programs that they intend to implement under AB 32. The budget for this audit is 1,960 hours. Again, that's about a 5-month audit.
I'd like to move the audit.
Thank you. Can we have the effect? Is that a second? Thank you. Can we have the affected agencies? We have James Goldstein. Thank you.
Good morning, Assemblymember Huber and members of the committee. I'm James Goldstein. I'm the Executive Officer of CARB. The fee program is currently under development. We've kicked off the process in January of this year, and in the last 8 months, we held 3 workshops and numerous public meetings with stakeholder groups. We've circulated a concept paper and 2 drafts of our proposed regulations for comment before releasing our 140-page proposal, which is here. This is all very public and transparent. My board considered the fee proposal at its June board meeting and decided to continue the item to give staff additional time to work with stakeholders, which we've been doing. We plan to take the regulation back to my board in September. Because the regulation has not been adopted by the board, I want to make sure the committee understands that the public process is still underway. We're continuing to meet with our stakeholders, and we're holding a public workshop next Tuesday to discuss more modifications based on stakeholder input. The comment period is still open, and the board has not yet made a decision. As part of the process, I think as you all know, we are required by state law to respond in writing to each public comment we receive in our final statement of reasons and decide if we should modify our proposal in response to each comment. In short, we haven't finished the regulation yet. Moreover, I want to advise the committee that there has already been litigation related to this fee regulation, and we're in the process of negotiating with the plaintiffs. In response to Public Records Act requests, we've already released thousands of pages of documents related to the proposed regulation. Nevertheless, of course, if the committee decides to go forward, we'll happily cooperate with the auditor. I'm available for questions as well as staff if the committee has any other questions.
Thank you. Is there any public comment in support of the audit first?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. My name is Dorothy Rothrock. I'm with the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, and many of my members would be the fee payers under this regulation. We're very concerned that the CARB can justify the amount that they have spent for the administering AB 32 so that we can make sure that we're not being taxed rather than feed. We're also very concerned that the amounts of money are shared proportionately according to how the monies have been spent. And up until this point, we've not been satisfied with how forthcoming CARB has been with the documentation for that. The Public Records Act request was started in February. It took longer than required under law for them to reply, and when they did reply, it was insufficient. They still are withholding 50,000 records that we are not sure whether they're justified in withholding. And as a result of all of it, and you can see in our letter, our coalition letter, fully 43% of the 57 million in claimed expenditures have not been justified. That goes to PYs, contracts, equipment, operating costs, and we're very concerned that they do not have the records to justify where the money has been spent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coley. And again, I'm testifying on behalf of the California Small Business Association and the California Black Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Chair Huber and committee members. Small business is very concerned about the cost. We are not opposed to AB 32, but part of AB 32 was a small business impact study that was to be done, and we do not feel that this has been done adequately, and we're very concerned about that there is no oversight, no caps on fees, and that these in this economic times are going to be passed on to small business owners that cannot afford them. So we're asking for oversight, and we are asking for, in addition to future savings, that we look very carefully at the costs in the beginning. So any costs of running the agency, we feel, will be passed on to the small business community, and so we're asking for an aye vote on this particular.
Thank you. Since we've had two long testimonies, any other supports, just please state your name and the organization.
Valerie Nero for the California Chamber of Commerce. We're in support of the audit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tony Francois. I've been working with a group of organizations that filed the Public Records Act request, and so Ms. Rothrock's comments adequately summarized that, but if there's any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any additional comments in support? Any in opposition to the audit?
Chair Huber, members of the committee, my name is Dan Cobb with the Union of Concerned Scientists. Thanks very much for allowing us to testify. One could say that any agency, could and should be audited if there was sufficient funds and a reason to do so. I've been following AB 32 implementation since the very beginning and rigorously, and I don't see any unusual or egregious or any reasons that ARB would stand out as an agency of the many hundreds of agencies and boards and commissions we have in the state to say, here's one of a few that should be audited, given that the state can't audit every commission every year, obviously. And so, go ahead. Sure. Sure. I've also been following the fee provision rule, I guess you'd call it, that is underway at CARB and is not yet finished. And again, I don't see anything out of the ordinary. Again, it's not yet finished, so there's still more that ARB is going to do before even to determine whether there is a reason to audit them. But I don't see this as a justification or a strong reason to have an audit for this agency. Thank you.
Derek Walker, Director of the California Climate Initiative at Environmental Defense Fund. Chairwoman Huber and members of the committee, thank you. We strongly oppose the audit request. We, as many other stakeholders, support the transparency, full transparency and accountability of state government. This is an ongoing process, still open for public comment. CARB has always shown that they are best practice in terms of state agencies, not only in California, but elsewhere in the country in terms of their commitment to sharing information with the legislature and other interested parties. So we would request that the committee deny this request and allow CARB to continue fulfilling their obligation to design regulations under AB 32.
Thank you.
Ann Nothoff with the Natural Resources Defense Council, and want to point out in particular the transparency that is going on with this, and also to be clear that this authority is clearly authorized in the statute.
We already had 2 fully testify, so now we have to do names and organizations for opposition.
Not off with NRDC opposed.
Thank you so much. Question, Senator Ducheney?
I don't know. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's sort of a comment, I guess, more than, but, and I don't know, maybe the board can respond in part, but I get the frustration, and I think this really is, I don't know if this is an appropriate way to use the audit, and if it is, I think it's premature because of the fact that they're in the middle of the feed thing. It is an awkward time to go look at how they're spending it because they haven't done it yet.
Senator Ducheney, can I point something out? This has nothing to do with their fee schedule. The audit request, it has to do with how they've spent the $57 million they've received to date. Okay, that's what really is at stake here. Because I don't mean to interrupt you, but everybody was starting to talk about the fee schedule and the structural regs, and that's not what this is about. This is about $57 million that they've been given to date, and the fact that CARB today, as of today, has failed to be able to justify over $11 million in operating expenses. And we couldn't fund the Conservation Corps as an example of things that happened. Let me give you another example here. CARB records today only support 40% of staff time claimed. Okay, on April 30th, an internal email to CARB division chiefs showed that CARB had only accounted for 43,000 of the 700,000 budgeted for equipment purchases during the 07-08. This is less than 10% of the budgeted amount 10 months after the end of the fiscal year in which it was spent. CARB also reports that its equipment expenses of $1.8 million for fiscal year 08-09. However, the accounting records that they provided only can support about 64,000 in expenses. So these are the questions. It has to do with money, not fee schedule.
Senator Dutton, just because the state auditors, for the very first paragraph in the state auditor's report and her analysis of the audit requests you're specifically interested in the methods used to identify and allocate costs to develop the proposed fee schedule. There was some confusion about this.
Yeah, right, and I understand that, but part of what that's about is that some of the dollars that they're spending is what they're going to use to try to justify the fee. But there's questions about how they're even spending the money.
Let's let CARB just answer, since a lot of these issues were raised in the public comment section. I just want to give CARB a chance to respond to those allegations.
We are prepared to explain to Senator Dutton and the sponsors of this request exactly how we've gone about determining what we will need to reimburse our costs for AB 32 implementation.
He's right. That's not the question. Let me just go back to where I was before Senator Dutton interrupted me. I mean, the problem is I've been, and Senator Dutton knows this, I really have resented the borrowing on this thing. I've resented the borrowing in the last 2 or 3 years, and you were supposed to do this thing 2 years ago, and now you're finally almost there. And we have tried not to do the borrowing that kept them alive the last couple of years, or we've tried to do it from different sources than the ones they have done, because they've been borrowing from the Beverage Recycling Fund, which makes a lot of us crazy. And that's troublesome. But that issue and the issue of whether implementation ought to be delayed based on some of the testimony like the small business folks and others, and a bill Senator Dutton has had in the past about how to think about the implementation of the AB 32 regs and what the impacts that'll have on the economy and businesses, and the fact that the economic analysis that CARB did has been widely questioned. Is really, I think, what this is about. And so the audit, to me, is not necessarily something that gets at those which are basically policy and political problems. And I don't know how to help CARB get to where they need to go. What I'm a little concerned about, Senator Dutton, is interrupting the current process, which will get them off of the borrowing thing to the place where then, if the fee schedule were implemented, or at least put in regulation, then we can get back to how do you what are we doing here, and so whether the delay ought to occur in implementation, it shouldn't be a delay in getting them on a fee schedule of some kind that will allow the department to exist. And so I'm a little torn, and I'm a sense of a little bit of prematurity here. and I
Let's
don't
wait
know
and
how to think
see
about.
if the other two questions that are
You know.
pending can help you a little bit here. Senator Wolk.
I just have a question. Bob, I understand the issue of your concern for oversight. My question is why the audit, why now, and why not use our own budget process, it seems to me, our own oversight. Certainly members of the legislature have an extraordinary interest in AB 32, and as it goes forward, there must be 100 select committees that deal with this issue. I mean, why not
numerous
there
requests have been
now?
made, and so far we cannot get the responses. I mean, the requests have been made. I mean, just like this was on the agenda for last month, and there still hasn't been any clarity. There was an additional $5 million, but every time they answer a question, it just brings up more questions. So I felt that, and have felt now for a while, that we should use our process to just do our proper oversight and make sure that, especially when we're taking special funds that are for other purposes. Now, that's what really kind of bothers me more than anything else. Like I pointed out, the Conservation Corps was eliminated, and the source of funding for that program is what was used in order to provide this money that, to date, we still cannot receive an accounting of how that money they've received to date has actually been spent.
My concern is with the venue. Again, an audit, I mean, it just seems to me, again, I stated my position. I just think that our existing committees ought to be able to exercise this oversight. And period.
Well, I've been budget vice chair of the Senate for a while, and I'm telling you that I am not getting responses. Okay, and I am the vice chair of Senate budget.
Senator Padilla.
Couple things. One is a reach out to Senator Dutton as a member of the Senate Select Committee on AB 32 implementation. There's a hearing scheduled for the 21st, which is Friday, actually, in Southern California. So I'm happy to work with you to raise questions and issues, whatnot. That's more of a side note. My two first questions on the request pending before us, and I think Senator Ducheney was asking something pretty much along the same lines, and that's, I read your letter of audit request, and then there's the staff report in front of us that has sort of a scope of the audit, and they don't seem to be the same. So I want to know from you, since you're requesting the audit, are you comfortable with the language of what's before us? I mean, when I read your letter, you seem to be pretty specific to the $57 million, and how do you justify that figure?
Mm-hmm.
So I came, having read that, inclined to think, well, what's wrong with that? I think the audit summary description before us is maybe a little bit broader. It can be interpreted as a little bit broader, and maybe that's what's
my major concern right now is how the $57 million has been spent. Now, part of what that is going to be help to justify the cost. When you establish your fee, you have to justify the nexus between the fee you're charging and the costs associated with it. Some of these costs will justify the fee that they're proposing, but if you can't even get a straight answer on the cost, then you can't use that. But so I'm mainly concerned about the 57. That's my problem.
Ultimately, the fee would incorporate costs beyond what's arguably captured in the $57 million. But it's part of it, and that's your argument.
Yeah.
My other question and concern is timing. I mean, the nature of the work that ARB is doing for AB 32 implementation for the calendar year 2007, the first year after the bill was approved and signed into law, I would just imagine is different than what the nature of the work and scope of the work was in calendar year 2008, and it's different than 2009, and it's different than 2010. So if we're selecting a specific activity, action, or time frame to be audited, why is this a good, if not the best?
Well, during this last budget process, CARB needed an additional, I think it was $30 million or so forth. And if I can't even, I've been in business as a property asset manager for 40 years. And I didn't make it a practice to just hand somebody some money without justifying to me, how you spent the money I already gave you. Okay, and was it spent appropriately? And then, bottom line, based on what is your requirements and needs for this new money source, and then I'll give you that. Well, part of the process has to be is getting an appropriate accounting as to how you spent the money I already gave you. And so far to date, there's questions about how that money was spent, and we just haven't been able to get clear answers. That's the reason we went to the state auditor to say, can you provide us with some insight? And I'm willing to go with the state auditor as being the expert in this area. You tell me how we can best provide the oversight necessary to make sure the taxpayers' dollars are being spent appropriately.
And again, part of the spirit of me coming in inclined to at least be open, if not supportive, is in this new era where it's accountability and transparency in government for both of our houses, given our budget crisis and for other considerations. Again, why not? But I'm also hearing from folks that, well, is this the right venue? Look, I'm sensitive to you. I know you've been talking to me directly about it, and whether we've had a specific hearing on this topic or issue to get you your answers. That hasn't been the case, and you're exercising every tool at your disposal. Good for you as a legislator. But the timing for me, my two big questions are, is the timing of this the best and appropriate time or not? And second, just to make sure that the audit request before us is what you requested it to be. And if there's any difference, then I wanted to clarify that. But it seems like you're comfortable with the language.
My big thing is the $57 million and how it was spent and so forth. And let me suggest that everybody think about this. We all know that all the process we've been through during this last year, and we're going to have another multi-billion-dollar problem. Okay, and unfortunately, there isn't any one singular answer. Okay, every department of the entire state is going to have to be held accountable for how they're spending their money. CARB is no different. We've got a few $1 million sitting out there that we can't account for.
Well, let me be a little bit more blunt, and I'll end with this. Is your intent with this audit request just to account for those $57 million and justify that figure? Because I've heard from others who are suggesting to some of us on this panel to vote no, because it's just Bob Dutton's way of, if he can't repeal AB 32, he wants to impede AB 32 implementation.
Yes, the short answer is yes. I'm interested in the $57 million and having accountability as to how that money was spent. There's no big secret that I have my doubts about how AB 32 is being implemented. I've been approached by numerous people throughout this entire state. Economists from Harvard, UCLA, even the LEO has raised questions about the economic analysis that was done. Two professors from Sacramento State has just also joined the group of people who have issued concerns. However, that's not what this is about. This is strictly about $57 million. How did you spend it? Give us the proper information so we can do the oversight.
Thank you.
I got Assemblymember Hagman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And there's 2 points I want to bring up too. This is implemented before I got up here, but it's one of the bigger policy implications to the economy and the business climate here in California for a long time. People are nervous about this. People don't know how it's going to be implemented. People don't know what the fees are. They can't project their business expenditures without. I think for open and transparency as much as possible, to have an independent source kind of parallel your open process that you're having right now, to give the confidence in this legislature that those intents of the legislation and the fees, and those are direct fees going to the actual cost, are implemented correctly. I think it'd be a wonderful thing to have. Secondly, I'm sure the auditor can schedule this audit till after your process of hearings and you're coming out till after September. You were saying earlier that you probably won't get started till later part of this year anyway, till October, November anyway. So I don't think it would interfere with your open process right now of what you're doing. But as Senator Dutton was saying, if those fees cannot be accountable, when we did local fees and assessments on the council level, we did have to account for all the hours and the expenses occurred to establish a fair fee for service, when that be our building department, whatever. And so if you don't have a base to start off with that is very open and clear, you may always have those doubts on those fees, and you always have those taxes on those fees unless you could justify where you've been and how you're getting to those points anyway. So I think it is interrelated at a certain point, and I think it's for your benefit to have an independent auditor, not the political process, but a very objectable audit done to this, so you have that clarity as you move forward in your mission.
There's been a motion and a second, and I don't see any further questions from the committee members, so we're going to go ahead and take a vote.
Huber?
No.
Huber, no. Chesbro? Chesbro, aye. Kodo? No. Oh, okay. Chesbro, no.
I know. But in your heart.
Kodo? DeVore? Yes, Kodo. Kodo, no. DeVore? Garrick? Garrick, aye. Hagman? Hagman, aye. Monning? Monning, no. Ashburn? Ashburn, aye. Cogdill? Ducheney? Dutton?
Aye.
Dutton, aye. Padilla? Padilla, aye. Wiggins?
No.
Wiggins, no. Wolk?
But I'm on E. I'm voting yes on E.
Okay. Okay. Wolk? Wolk, no. It's on call.
They won't.
It doesn't.
They don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't.
It will be on call for a couple of minutes. There's not enough votes either way at the moment, so we'll leave it open. I will stay here for 5 more minutes for anyone who wants to come and finish voting on any of the matters. Otherwise, we are done with our business on the agenda for today. Thank you.